Oh, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today to talk about the Commission's proposal to expand tribal participation in the E-rate program. I'm sure most of you on with us today already know what the E-rate program is, but it's one of the Commission's Universal Service Fund programs. It provides financial support to ensure schools and libraries can obtain affordable, high-speed broadband services and internal connections to connect today's students and library patrons with next generation learning opportunities. I'm Matthew Duchesne. I'm the Chief of the Office of Native Affairs and Policy, or what we affectionately call ONAP. And I want to do some quick introductions before we get started of some of the other FCC staff that are on. We're joined, We're joined by Barbara Esbin, who is the Deputy Chief in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau and who oversees ONAP as part of the intergovernmental relationships that the Commission has. We're also joined by Sairi Rajapaksa, who is the Deputy Chief of ONAP, by Janet Sievert, Lloyd Collier, and Derek Goetson, who are all legal advisors in ONAP. Those of us in ONAP are joined by several folks from the Wireline Communications Bureau. First, we have Chris Monteith, who is the Chief of the Wireline Bureau. We have Sue McNeil, who's the Associate Bureau Chief. We have Kate Dumichel, the Special Counsel in the Bureau's Telecommunications Access Policy Division, and she'll be leading the discussion today, or at least providing the initial overview for you. We also have Rhonda Lean, an attorney advisor in the Pricing Policy Division, and Jeanne Schreiber, the Deputy Division Chief in, I believe, the Telecommunications Access and Policy Division. We're also joined by Cranell Alfred. I hope a lot of you know her already. She is the Tribal Liaison at the Universal Services Administrative Company, which is abbreviated as USAC. And we are joined by Nancy Weiss, who is with the Institute of Museum and Library Services. In terms of the discussion today, we should have two parts. First, as I mentioned, Kate Dumichel will provide an overview of the notice of proposed rulemaking that the Commission released on October 1st. That notice proposes to amend the Commission's rules to make it easier for tribal libraries to participate in the E-rate program, but it also seeks comment on other things that the Commission could do to increase tribal participation in the E-rate program. So we're hoping to get your ideas for that today as well. After the presentation, we'll open it up for questions and comments. You'll be able to ask questions directly. If you want to do it in writing, you can use the chat function. We do encourage you to do it orally if you're willing. To do that, please raise your hand in the on the toolbar to let us know that you have a question and that we should call on you. When we do call on you, we'd appreciate it if you could introduce yourself so we know who you are, who you represent, and just kind of keep track of who's joined us today. And I think you probably know already that we are recording this event. It will subsequently be posted. I'm not sure how long it will take to be posted, but it will be at a minimum on the Commission's YouTube channel. Probably take a week or so to get it up and posted. With that, I would like to turn it over to Kate to get us started.
Thanks, Matthew. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Dumichel, and as Matthew mentioned, I'm Special Counsel in the Wireline Competition Bureau's Telecommunications Access Policy Division, working on the E-rate program. So on September 30th, the Federal Communications Commission adopted a notice of proposed rulemaking proposing to update the definition of library in the E-rate program rules and provide clarity regarding the eligibility of tribal libraries to promote increased participation in the program. In doing so, we seek to address a long-standing issue that's impeded tribal libraries in seeking E-rate support. As background, Section 254H4 of the Communications Act of 1934 provides that a library or library consortium is not entitled to preferential rates or treatment, basically E-rate discounts, unless it's eligible for assistance from a state library administrative agency under the Library Services and Technology Act, LSTA. In establishing the E-rate program in 1997, the Commission adopted the definition of library then contained in the LSTA and cited to the 1996 public law. Since the adoption of the E-rate program definition of library, some tribal libraries have been unable to seek E-rate support because they were ineligible for LSTA funds from a state library administrative agency. This jurisdictional conflict remained until 2018, when Congress adopted the Museum and Library Services Act of 2018, amending the LSTA to specifically include tribal libraries in the definition of libraries that are eligible for support from a state library administrative agency. Consistent with Congress's amendment, that the notice proposes to add tribal library to the definition of library and remove references to the 1996 version of the LSTA. This proposed rule change is also consistent with the definition of library that the Commission adopted in the Emergency Connectivity Fund earlier this year. By making it clear that tribal libraries are eligible for E-rate support, we seek to further the goal of increasing tribal libraries' access to advanced telecommunications and information services, internal connections, and basic maintenance of internal connections through the E-rate program. The notice also seeks comment on other measures the Commission should consider to ensure tribal entities have access to the E-rate program. We're particularly interested in hearing ideas for improving tribal library participation in the program today, and also formally in comments submitted to the record. Interested parties can submit comments by Monday, November 15th, and reply comments by Monday, November 29th in the FCC's electronic comment filing system. And that's the summary. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. This is Sue McNeil. I'll just jump in and echo Kate's thanks. We're really looking forward to getting your feedback about what we can be doing to better promote participation in the E-rate program by tribal libraries as well as by tribal schools. So thank you so much for your time. I know how busy everyone is, and we look forward to a productive session. And before we get started with the Q&A, I wanted to acknowledge Nancy Weiss with IMLS. They've been a wonderful federal partner to us in all kinds of things, most recently in the Emergency Connectivity Fund program, and of course through E-rate as well. So Nancy, I'd like to give you an opportunity to say hello and a few words if you'd like.
Thank you, Sue, and to the team. The Institute of Museum and Library Services has primary responsibility for the development and implementation of policy to ensure the availability of museum, library, and information services to meet the needs throughout the nation of individuals and communities throughout the nation. And we are just thrilled to be working with the FCC on ways to help ensure that tribes can access the resources for broadband. We know that access to high-speed connectivity and digital know-how is critical for success, and that Congress has long seen the central role of libraries in this process. And in fact, the Telecommunications Act and the Library Services and Technology Act were passed at the same time and really worked together to create that infrastructure to make sure that there is affordable and ubiquitous access to broadband services. We know that this has really been a challenge over the years, and part of it is because although our legislation was passed at the same time and works together, they weren't exactly passed at the same moment. So there's been a disconnect, and we really look forward and appreciate the work that is being done by the FCC here and incorporating Here also information that we've been receiving from our nation-to-nation consultations, through a recent Digital Inclusion Summit at the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, through our National Tribal Broadband Summit. So thank you, and look forward to the conversation today.
This is Chris Monteith. I just wanted to echo Sue's words and to thank Nancy for being such a great partner in this effort. Thanks to our colleagues in CGB for spearheading this listening session. Kate, you did a fantastic job of providing an overview of the issues, and just the entire team working on this really important issue has just been a pleasure to work with. It really is an important issue. If nothing else, the pandemic has brought home the critical importance of having a broadband connection, and having those connections in schools and libraries is just so important. And so we're very excited to be moving this issue forward, and look forward to seeing increases in participation by tribal libraries and schools. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, we do want to open it up for questions and comments. Again, you can raise your hand on the toolbar, or you can enter a question in the chat.
And while those questions are percolating, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat to the NPRM so that folks have it available. And again, we would love to get your comments formally. We'll also be summarizing this conversation and including that in the record too. So, one of the things that would be helpful for us to know, for example, is whether or not your tribal government participates in the E-rate program, and particularly, do your tribal libraries receive E-rate funding? And what have you found to be helpful or not as helpful in terms of, being aware of the program and some of the requirements?
Do we have anyone who wants to jump in?
Hi, Matthew. This is Belinda from Gila River Telecommunications. I always have something to say.
Good to hear from you, Belinda.
We are a provider, so to that end, we are aware that a lot of the schools here in the Gila River Indian community participate in E-rate. So I don't have the perspective from the schools themselves, but I was just going to suggest, if you want to reach out to more schools, I don't know if there's coordination with the National Indian Education Association, but that's a big association with all the schools across Indian country. They just had their convention in Omaha, I think. Yeah, last on the 13th through the 16th, just a couple of weeks ago. Outreach to this association will help tremendously as far as getting feedback, I think, and to the extent that, Gila River Telecommunications and some of the tribal telcos form the National Tribal Telecom Association, perhaps we could assist with that, act as a liaison to that group. But yeah, that's a pretty huge education association. So the other outreach I would recommend is to the Bureau of Indian Education. start there at the top. And they're right there in DC. And so, you know, getting more participation, outreach would be first step. So thank you.
Thank you so very much for that. I really appreciate it. I think we do have relationships with at least some of those groups, both through our colleagues in ONAP as well as at USAC. But I think reinforcing those would be terrific. And we definitely appreciate your willingness, Belinda, through NTTA to help facilitate. Thank you.
Other suggestions folks might have? I think it's probably fairly obvious that clarifying that tribal libraries are eligible to participate is a good thing. I don't think we'll get a lot of objections to that, but really do hope to get some ideas for other ways to help increase tribal participation in this program.
Yeah, my name is John Chadwick, and I'm the I do ed tech and E-rate for public education department in New Mexico. And you know, we went through quite an ordeal with the Navajo Nation on their tribal libraries, and you know, the biggest problem was that you know the Navajo Nation is in 3 states, and the Arizona rules in terms of what is a library are very loose. Whereas in New Mexico, there's a lot of points that they have to hit, and it would be the tribe was able to make the argument, and rightfully so, that Head Start facilities are run by the tribe and were not subject to New Mexico state law. But they were not able to make that same argument with what ended up being classified as emerging libraries in New Mexico. And so it would, when you have situations like that, it really, it makes life a lot more difficult, and there should be, and it really, and it's a disservice to the residents in those areas.
Thank you for that. I agree. That's a perfect example of the need for this rule change. Thank you.
I believe we have something in the chat now.
Hi, this is Miriam Jorgensen. I work with the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. I'm research director at Native Nations Institute at the University of Arizona. And you're probably aware that ATOM did a survey back in 2013, 2014 of digital inclusion in tribal libraries. And at that time found that at least in the early part of the 2010s, there was pretty steady response rate from 2010 and 2013 that about 50% of tribal libraries had never even heard of E-rate. The recent survey that was completed in 2021 that had about a third of tribal libraries participating, although really from across, really decent cross section of those tribal libraries, suggests that 40% have still never heard of E-rate. And those who had heard of it, and these are still preliminary results, so I'm being a little bit delicate in talking about this. A lot of folks felt like it was very complicated to apply for. And I, of course, invite Susan Feller, who's the president of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, who's also in attendance here at this listening session, to provide more context, as she's spoken to a lot of tribal librarians more recently about this. I think there's great excitement about the change in the designation. And Michael, as you pointed out, like, who could disagree with this? But the fact remains that it is a program that doesn't have, that lots of people who are the target of the program are not aware of. And find it complicated, especially when they're fairly low capacity institutions. And so I really appreciate what you had to say just before I entered my comments into the chat. And in fact, they're what motivated them, which is this change really needs to go along with some targeted outreach that is going to really inform the the proper audience about what E-rate is and what it can do, and make sure that there can be everything done that's possible to make it a program that's possible to participate in and possible to apply for, and more than that, relevant to the particular needs of Native communities. I think there's a sense right now that some tribal libraries might not find E-rate as helpful because they have other technology needs that if those aren't met, then E-rate can't help them. So I think that there is to just underscore that outreach task, and that besides changing the rule, there's a complementary set of things that need to happen.
Yeah, thank you. That's extremely well stated and very much appreciated. I think we do need to work towards the outreach of the program, but as you say, make sure we're addressing the attendant needs and making it as simple as possible for those entities that are interested to participate. And so if there are specific ideas that you all have about how we might go about doing outreach, if there are opportunities that you might want to include us in, we'd be happy to talk about it and work through it with people. And I just want to, mention Cranell Alfred too as well at USAC. She is the tribal liaison, and we work with her so much. And I know she has started to develop a lot of tribal specific training, and we would love your feedback on that, because I think, she's always so mindful and so good at reminding us about trying to target the particular needs of the tribal communities.
And Sue, I see, I think I overlooked that Jim Dunstan has his hand up. Jim, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I was just wondering why in the NPRM, let me introduce myself, Jim Dunstan, the Mobius Legal Group. I represent the Navajo Nation, among other tribes. But I was interested to ask why in the NPRM, there's a reference to LSTA, but there is no reference to LSCA. At the time that the Telecom Act was passed in '96, the reference is actually not to LSTA, but to LSCA, the predecessor statute. And the reason that's important is because under LSCA, tribes were actually put on par with states. And only after LSTA came into law later in 1996, where tribes sort of slid underneath the states, which has given us this problem that was finally taken out in 2018. I'm just wondering if there was any thought, if that was, a cognitive decision in drafting this, or just there isn't institutional knowledge, left to note that really this was a problem that was created by a weird statutory glitch that the commission, frankly, could have solved back in 1997 and didn't. But I'm just, NNTRC, Navajo will be filing comments, and I'll go into this in great detail in my comments. But I'm just wondering if that was omission or commission that LSCA isn't recognized in the NPRM. Thank you.
I might be able to help if it would be useful. So that's where we were talking about the mismatch. So the Library Services and Construction Act was the act that was in place when the Telecom Act was being drafted, and the Library Services and Technology Act was passed later in the year. There actually is a separate section for support of tribal library services within the Library Services and Technology Act. I think we've been trying together for a long time to help sort this out. And so our thinking was to try to make sure it's clear, no matter where you are in the Act, that tribal libraries are eligible for funding. And so we were able to do a revision in 2018 through the Library Services and Technology Act to add that tribal library, to have it move through and be able to affect the discussion today. Happy to provide any more background.
Thank you, Nancy. And I see Susan Feller has her hand up.
Thank you. I'm Susan Feller, and I'm president and CEO of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. And we work closely with tribal libraries. And in fact, we have a national Tribal Library Broadband Council that meets on a regular basis, and we're happy to lend our support to anything that will be helpful to you. I did have a meeting with a few tribal libraries yesterday, and I asked them what's holding you back, and what will it take to get you more interested in E-rate. And part of it is making it relevant to them. They don't see a lot of relevancy there. And also, connectivity is only one part of the issue. Some of them still are operating with Gates computers, and I don't remember when that program was, but that will give you an indication of how old their equipment is. They have a difficulty accessing software. They don't have trained staff. So there's a lot of remedial work that needs to be done. And in addition to the connectivity, I think that the lack of connectivity has held them back for several decades now because they've not been eligible. So there's just so much remedial work that needs to be done. And I'm hoping that at some point, I know that's probably not the role of this committee, but it would be good if at some point we could talk about how we can look at it on a more holistic matter. So I just also wanted to say thank you to everybody who has made this possible. It's been a long time and a lot of hard work. And so thank you all very much for making it happen. Thank you.
I would just say thank you so much for that thoughtful input. It's very helpful to us to hear what the barriers are. And, we can be a piece of the puzzle, and we'd like to help facilitate the broader picture too. So look forward to working with you on that. Thank you so much.
I agree. And of course, there have been within the last year or so new programs added to the already existing programs, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. We have the COVID-19 telehealth program. And I think that looking at those programs and tribal participation in those programs as well should be a part of the broader discussion that you're talking about, Susan.
Thanks, Chris. Eric Cutright.
Hello, my name is Eric Cutright, and I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Karuk tribe. I've got a question that might kind of fall into USAC procedural, but it also demonstrates the unique position a lot of tribes find themselves in. The Karuk tribe operates a couple of libraries in our ancestral territory, and we also operate an internet service provider for our area, for a lot of our residents and for other people that live in the ancestral territory. So the Karuk tribe might find themselves in the position where we're both an E-rate provider and an E-rate applicant. An applicant for the library and a provider to provide the internet to that library. And I didn't know if that's going to cause any problems, but I imagine a lot of tribes are going to be in a similar situation where, we don't always have separate entities run out. There's departments of the government. And I would want to make sure that however this rule gets implemented, unique situations like that would still allow these libraries to not be excluded simply because the tribe is also the one providing the internet. Because there are no other internet providers. It's not like we have a lot of choice.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We have there are other sort of analogous situations like that, and the E-rate program has competitive bidding rules. So there are sort of rules about not having the people who are bidding on the service involved in the decisions about who is being selected for the service. But there are ways, and I encourage you to speak to USAC about sort of the technical ways to set it up, but there's ways to set up, I don't know what it's called, but basically a barrier between the folks on different sides of the competitive bidding procedures. I think particularly in cases where there aren't any other service providers, it shouldn't become an issue. But you just have to be careful to keep the pieces separate.
And Susan, I see that your hand is up. I don't know if that's if you have another comment or question, or if it's just a holdover from before.
Thank you. No, I did have another question. I read in a press release that you were considering opening up E-rate funds to tribal communities that don't have tribal libraries. How would that work? And is that still on the table?
I'm wondering, Susan, if you're thinking about the Emergency Connectivity Fund. That's a program that we stood up recently based on a $7 billion appropriation that we got from Congress. And we had 2 application windows for schools and libraries to apply for connectivity and computer devices to meet off-campus connectivity needs. And we're starting to roll out the funding for that. We've done 3 waves of commitments, and I think at this point there are, I'm going to get the numbers wrong. I should have written it down, but there's tribes across 9 states that have received funding so far for that. So yeah, we're so pleased to have that opportunity. And as Chris mentioned as well, there's the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program and rural healthcare programs as well. So there are some different funding opportunities outside of E-rate to try and provide broadband access to tribal governments and tribes.
Thanks. It's not really a lack of opportunity because there seems to be funding available, but there's a lack of capacity with tribal libraries. They don't have grant writers. They're usually part-time employees. Most of them don't have advanced MLIS degrees. So it's just, maybe there's a way that we can do a program, something similar to what FCC has with the MICA group, where MICA provides consultants directly to tribes to help navigate the application process and then to also help build out some of the infrastructure. Is something like that possible?
I think certainly things to consider, Susan, and brainstorm other ways in which we can make sure that both information about these various programs and the funding opportunities that they provide are getting out to tribes and tribal organizations. And then Sue and others correct me if I'm misspeaking, but my recollection is that we have in the past provided tribal specific webinars and educational sessions to try to help with the application process and navigate those various processes. And I'm sure working with our colleagues in CGB, we would be pleased to, again, look at what those opportunities might be and try to work with you and other organizations to again, do that targeted kind of outreach that we're talking about in this session as well. We very much want to brainstorm and work towards how we can increase the funding that is going to tribal entities and make sure they know about these opportunities. As I said earlier in this session, the pandemic has really, many of us have been working towards closing the digital divide and digital inclusion and all of those issues for years. But the pandemic has really hit home the importance of that. And it's such a missed opportunity if we don't seize this moment to really try to make a difference, in my opinion. And I know that's where my colleagues at the FCC come out.
Yes, and I agree. But webinars aren't doing it because Cranial works hard and she tries so hard to reach people. And it's just all of the remedial work that needs to be done. And we have to go beyond webinars. Thank you.
And I agree with that, Susan. It's a challenging time. We did historically, the commission has tried to get out to meet in person with tribes, tribal members, tribal communities. That just has not been feasible over the course of the last year and a half. But I would very much appreciate, and I'm sure that CGB colleagues, Matthew and others would appreciate, an opportunity to dialogue about that. You know, a webinar, you're absolutely right. A webinar just doesn't cut it if you don't have the broadband connection to begin with. So thank you for that comment.
I see that Jim underscored Eric's comments in the chat. Anybody else want to ask a question or offer a comment while we have the opportunity? Well, hopefully I am not overlooking anybody, but I don't want to keep you all on either if we've covered everything. I may ask Sue to offer a few closing remarks. I just wanted to echo what I think Kate said at the beginning. In addition to this listening session, there is the normal comment and reply comment period, as well as the opportunity to submit ex partes or to request a meeting with the commission, before a final decision is made. I know Jim said that Navajo would be submitting some. So we encourage others to as well. And not seeing any other questions, Sue.
Matthew, may I interject? This is Belinda again.
Sure.
Before closing, one of the things at Gila River that we have is computer labs. You know, they're connected. They have broadband capacity. Kids go there for homework, to complete their homework assignments. We have 2 Boys and Girls Clubs here that have computer labs as well. And the Boys and Girls Club focus on education to a great extent. So we do have the capacity for kids to come in and finish their schoolwork. They're not truly libraries, but they have computers and they come in and, finish their work. So that would be another situation where I think the definition of schools and libraries could be extended. So, I know that other tribes have similar situations where they may have a building that's not necessarily a library, but it's a place where kids can come in, access hotspots, or get their work done within the building. So that's just my additional comment. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Belinda. And I did want to note, I think I overlooked a question that Jim had in the chat. This isn't always all that user-friendly. The NPRM notes the definition of library includes academic library. Can you define this? Many boys and girls clubs on tribal land offer many academic qualities. I think that's qualities. Yeah, qualities. And I don't have the answer. I don't know if anybody else does or if it's something we need to follow up on.
We could maybe follow up on academic libraries, but I think just generally we'd be looking at looking for entities that have the characteristics of a library. So for ECF, we've said that's regular hours, staff, materials. So, that there might be an analogous way for the E-rate program to handle that. For some of these places to do homework for Wi-Fi, I would sort of like to plug the ECF program, the Emergency Connectivity Fund program, that there are schools and libraries who are sort of working to set up other locations that are off campus that might be needed for remote learning. We've had 2 windows, they've both closed at this point, but it's just something to think about for future possibilities.
Thank you, Kate. I did want to acknowledge, Barry, that your chat, we will send you a link once this has been uploaded so that you can watch the entire thing. Anybody else have any last thoughts or words they want to share? Okay, well, again, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Look forward to hearing more as we go forward, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day.